Hey, Geekscapists, I'm here with my good friend Andrew Traucki. He has a brand new movie out. It's called The Reef, Stalked. It is out right now. If you're watching this or listening to this, it's going to be out on Shudder or in theaters here in the States. But as you can hear when Andrew starts talking, he's Australian. He's down in Australia right now. I'm not even going to guess the time difference between where you're at and here in Los Angeles. It's maybe I will. I'm guessing it's exactly 12, 11 hours, something like that. You're exactly on the opposite side of the planet.
What time is it there?
It is 6 o'clock in the evening.
So it's 7 hours difference. Well, actually, it's we're the next day, so it's it's more than 7 hours, but just difference between you and me. It's 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, so let me do a quick math. That is 6 plus 11, and I think you're 17 hours later than me. That's insane.
Now,
you're 17 hours in the future. Yeah, you're 17 hours in the future. That's incredible. Nothing big's happened news-wise. Nothing crazy that I have to be looking forward to. What are the lotto numbers?
That's exactly right.
Andrew's got this new movie, The Reef, Stalked. It's a sequel, or does it take place in the same universe as The Reef, which you'd done a few years ago?
Yeah, it's not really a sequel in the sense that, none of the characters are still there or anything like that. It's just more in the same wheelhouse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk me through it, because you've done a couple of these films. Some are also in one of what you have a series of films that are also in the same kind of wheelhouse, same tonal universe. Let's call it a tonal universe, maybe.
Yeah, right.
But it feels like natural world or the environment preying upon people who infringe upon it or just dare to visit. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. I mean, I like to call them survival thrillers. It's sort of like, I don't know about you, but I love that game of, this is real, the boat's gone over, what would I do next? Would I stay with the boat or would I swim? So I love putting myself in that sort of position. I mean, there's a great book called Deep Survival that explores survival situations, right in depth, and comes up with certain traits you got to be a survivor. So that's kind of what I really like about them. But yeah, they are all in a very natural setting, and they all have a natural predator, but a predator that's still around. It's not ghosts or anything imaginary. It's they're real animals that still exist.
And what led you to that kind of storytelling? Like, because it's a pretty dominant theme in your filmography.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's two things. One is you get pigeonholed, and I did a couple of successful films, and that's what everybody comes to me with nowadays. So I am looking for a nice musical comedy if anyone's got one. But the other one is I really like suspense and thrillers, and these are films that I can get made because the whole world seems to think Australia's just got mad, crazy animals that will kill you.
I was just saying how poisonous that continent is.
Yeah. Apparently.
I'm from Texas. We just have people who will kill you.
Yeah, I'm amazed I'm still alive. So yeah, no, it's so the world does see us as this exotic place. So it's sort of marketable to make a thriller in this sort of space because the world goes, oh, Australia sharks, oh, Australia crocodiles, So yeah, I mean, my main interest is the thrill aspect, the tension that I can create, and just putting people through, hopefully, a nerve-wracking time.
What were some of those influences getting into film? Take me through young Andrew and what he's watching, or maybe what he's experiencing in his own life. That's like, okay, like that nerve that it just struck with me. How do I replicate that, and how do I get good at enhancing that for others?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the sort of filmmakers that I gravitate towards are the ones that are more about suspense rather than action and that. So like, Hitchcock, David Lynch, he's got a wonderful dark psychology about him. Those sort of films that are a little bit more cerebral, I guess, in their thriller approach rather than being more action driven. Not that I have anything against action, but I just like the suspense and the psychology of that. So yeah, those sort of films that have that would be the sort of films I was watching.
And I noticed that in you watch, you make a shark movie, you're going to get compared to Jaws. You make a shark movie, there's just it's just got its own gravitational pull. Yet unlike Jaws, you're staying almost completely on the water. This entire movie, you're staying almost completely on the water.
Yeah.
How is that from a production element, but also from a narrative element? How are you? Because you wrote this movie. What are some of the things that you said? I mean, did you go in knowing that the movie was predominantly going to be on the water, in these skiffs or boats, and there wasn't going to be the safety of shore for long stretches of this film? Was that a design in the writing, or was that a necessitation in production? At what point did you make that decision? Because it actually makes this pretty non-Jaws as far as shark movies go.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you're on the water with this film, you can't really get off it because, the threat's the shark, and I put them on the water pretty early. So, yeah, I guess that sort of necessitated the whole film was going to be on the water. I mean, it's not easy working on the water by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's, they say don't work with children, animals, and in water. So it was a difficult production. As I was on a natural beach, and we actually had one day we were on the sand, but a shark did swim by. I mean, it was only a small shark. It was only a 4 foot, 5 foot reefy, but nevertheless, it swam by. And then another day, when we're shooting in water, one of the camera assistants trod on a ray and got a barb in her leg. So that was pretty. That's 4 days of extreme pain on painkillers. The wind's blowing. So one day the wind blew the script out of my hand, and I landed in the water. So I had paper mache to look at for until they, what are we doing now? I don't. Well, yeah.
Nature doesn't like the way we're painting it right now. It's giving us some feedback.
Maybe it's nature's revenge. Maybe I don't know. But the good side of all that is that I think it looks very real, and we got that look and feel about the film that I was after.
Were there times though when you're cursing writer Andrew and saying,
yeah,
"Hey, you couldn't have just written in some scenes in town. You couldn't have written in some of these other pieces"?
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I'd get up at 5:30, put on my wetsuit, be standing in the water for 10 hours, come home and take my wetsuit off. I mean, the human body's not designed to be marinated in brine for 10 hours a day. It's, so it was hard work, and the crew were amazing. The cast were amazing that we all sort of just got on with it and did it and got through it. So, there were times I was just thinking, why didn't I write this something on land? So, yeah.
This musical comedy, though, is all going to take place.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be super posh.
Yeah, unless it's, it could be synchronized swimming.
No, don't do that. I mean, listen, like I'm going to talk to writer Andrew and say, dude, don't do that to yourself. I know filmmakers like a challenge. I like filmmakers like to expand their language, but I think the water is where you've done your water movies.
I think you're right.
You've done them.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to find a way to be suspenseful outside of the water, if only for sanity.
A desert thriller.
Yeah, how long did it take you to not have raisin fingers after making this movie? Did it take a couple months?
Yeah. Look, every day you come out and your fingers are just prunes. And
I'm just worried about the focus puller, who has like those little gears on the focus pull, and already those little ridges are already on there. And if he's already got pruned fingers and he's pulling focus, after a while those might turn into blisters.
Actually, on a serious note, standing, there are a lot of what we call midges up there, and they bite you. They're like little flies. They bite you, and then you scratch them, and you form little scabs. But then standing in water all that time, they start to ulcerate. It starts to look a bit ugly after a while.
How many days did it take to shoot this film?
It was 24 in all.
And the majority of them are in the water. So those midges, they looked at y'all like a salad bar. Like they were ready to go anytime. Yeah, y'all were just like, here we are. Okay, you're no more water, Andrew. Andrew, if I've got to jump on your side of the planet and stop you, there's no more water going on with you.
I totally agree. You got me there.
So listen, we were talking earlier about building suspense. Not only is this movie predominantly on the water, there's long moments of non-action, and you expect a movie like this to be. It is a high concept movie, but usually with high concept movies, they really pack it with beats. Does that make sense, Andrew? There's beat, and there are high concept beats. They're like a physical thing breaking and then leading it to an attempt at a solution. Maybe that doesn't really work, and then you got to pivot to the next solution. But you have all these physical hurdles. In this movie, there's a long time. There are a couple places where there's a long time where that isn't there. It's characters just existing with each other.
Yeah, I
I mean,
disagree. I think that the whole time the movie's working, it's just that sometimes you've got to slow the pace down to create the tension.
exactly. And it's people kind of existing on the water with each other, kind of monitoring the situation. And it's not always a problem that it is there. It's ready to jump out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what I'm not sure, but all I know is that in the third act there is the shark comes back and they've got to try and find it, and to try and create the reality of the situation. I didn't want the shark just to be there and all. I wanted them to be looking for it and trying to search. And for me, that's where you bring some of the tension as well, because where is it? I think seeing a shark fin once you've seen it and then you don't see it's probably scarier than seeing a shark fin and seeing it the whole time, because then you know where it is. So I mean, in the third act, I sort of had to get the shark back and then they have to fight it. So there were moments when they had to look around and try and work out where it was. But for me, that was more about creating realism and tension rather than just typical beats, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And can we talk about the first act? Because the first act is actually the most, I mean, I thought that was the way to grip people into this movie, because it centers around an act of domestic violence.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not, spoilers, Geekscape it is not on the ocean, but it does involve water. And you're able to work that water imagery into later moments in the movie when a character is, I don't want to give away too much Geekscape, but a character is flashing back to, I don't want to call it a personal failure, but it's something that she's definitely haunted by. Where did that come from in putting that together? Because that's actually a really horrific moment in the movie.
Yeah, it is. And so look, because I did the Reef, almost over 10 years ago now, and people have been coming to me with sort of more B-grade shark films because I'd done a good job on the Reef, but I didn't really want to do that because, I like to go for realism and suspense. And so it took a long time to come up with an idea. And really, I came up with the idea because I was aware of domestic abuse in this country and how terrible it is. And then I saw this amazing play called Lethal Indifference. And I was sort of sitting in the theater and I looked around, I saw that the audience was mainly old and white. And I kind of thought, wow, this would be great to try and popularize this message or bring this message out a little bit to a wider audience. And at the same time, I'm a surfer. And so I know that surfers call sharks the man in the grey suit. And those two ideas sort of collided. And I thought, wow, maybe I can do a shark thriller that's also got this allegory or this analogy of domestic violence all the way through. Because once they leave the land, the man in the grey suit, i.e. the shark, becomes the threat. And so we have this this continuation of the idea. So that's how that all came up together. And that's what sort of inspired me to write it.
And were there times it was difficult to write it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because those two ideas don't necessarily sit naturally. I think, I'm really into elevated thrillers and horror and anything that sort of, you have the ride, but you also have the thought afterwards, or, it leaves you somewhat contemplative of what you've just seen. But those two ideas don't necessarily sit that well, because the thriller just wants you, like you say, action and keep it going. And, oh, there's another shark attack. Oh, there's another death and that. But the higher concept or the domestic abuse narrative needs you to slow down and examine relationships and the damage that's happened to these people and how they're trying to get over their trauma. So those two things, one's asking for time and dialogue and reflection, and the other one's asking for put the foot down. So you've kind of got to try and get the balance right. So that was the difficulty there, to try and to see if you could balance those two ideas out.
And I think that those are the parts, the human pieces in it were the parts that I found to be my favorite portions of the film.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
And I mean, ultimately, can we just say that you're not going to put shark tornadoes in your movies? Like, these people who are sending you this stuff, they need to back off, because it's either going to be a realistic, like horrific, it's either going to be a realistic terror and it's going to be of the natural world, or, I mean, would you consider doing the next film to be where humans are possibly the worst enemies to each other?
Absolutely. I mean, I sincerely believe out of all the animals on the planet, we're the ones that are most destructive and doing the most damage. So, I mean, once you put humans in, it's just called a thriller. It's not called a shark
I
thriller.
know it's hard to get financed if you're not going to have a
Yeah,
monster of some sense in there. Sure.
I have, I would love to just forget the animals and move on to just humans. I just need the right script and the right producers.
Yeah, because there's a beat in here, Geekscape, and I'm not spoiling too much, but I actually thought it was a pretty beautiful beat where the main character, she sees a bruise on one of her friends as the boyfriend or husband comes to intercept her after some time out on the water snorkeling, and as in her friend gets intercepted by the boyfriend husband, like, I'm still out with my friends, no, get in the car. And then they separate themselves from the main character, and she witnesses her get in the car, and it's the last time she sees her alive. And that moment of seeing her friend get into the car, and there's some unease, there's a lot of unease. That to me was as scary as, is a fin gonna pop up, or is the water gonna ripple, or is something gonna shake of this impending disaster. I would love, Andrew, to see a movie where you were allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Is there a script like that in the works?
I don't know. All I know is that, domestic abuse is such a heavy topic that when these films, people start talking about these films, it usually turns into some sort of, I don't know, it's either a documentary or a very heavy art house film. That's what trying to fuse it into this genre was appealing to me, that I wasn't going down either of those two tracks. I was trying to broaden out the reach of that message.
And I think the horror that you say you don't gravitate towards uses those things as a metaphor. So that's where the monsters come out of. The literal, like the monsters are the metaphors for the abuse. Like Freddy Krueger is a metaphor for these things. Jason Voorhees is a metaphor for these things. These monsters that are a little more fantastical, a little bit more beyond what you're trying to do, and live within something that is a known terror, an understood terror.
Yeah.
Let's see, maybe, I mean, and again, for a financier, it's just not sexy, but we got to find we'll find that lane, Andrew. You write it. What is it? Field of Dreams? You build it and they will come?
That's right. I think so.
I think maybe we got to write that thing. What are some of the other movies that you tried to avoid, knowing that Jaws has such a gravitational pull in this kind of genre with the sharks? And maybe this is a question more about venturing into this water the first time with the Reef. What were some of the things that, over 10 years ago with the Reef, you were saying, okay, this is what's done in the movies that came before it, I have to avoid them, or these are the successful things that I can build upon? Where were you at the Reef? Yeah. And then I want to know where you were here in not repeating or in learning from where you were in the first Reef for the Reef Stalked.
Yeah, sure. So it actually started with the very first feature I made called Black Water, which is actually, you'd call them alligators, I call them crocodile film. And it was based on a true story. And it was really a case of a very small budget. Before that, I had this big film, big sci-fi, no water. Unfortunately, that fell over and I didn't get to make that. And, it was a real eye-opener because it was a bigger budget and I was a first-time director, and it was just obvious I wasn't going to get a break. So I sort of gravitated towards the smaller, I thought, I've just got to make something that's very contained. It's the typical thing when you're starting out. And so I started watching low-budget films, and I watched Open Water. And so there I was watching Open Water, and strangely enough, in my living room was a blow-up crocodile, because I've got kids and I don't know, they had a blow-up crocodile. And I looked across and I saw the crocodile. Well, there's an apex predator, and it's an Australian story, it's an Australian creature. And so I started researching, and I found this amazing true story about a crocodile that chases some people up a tree. And anyway, and it was at that moment, with the producers going, "Oh, I've got to have build the lagoon in a studio. We've got to have an animated crocodile," and I just was going, no. Everyone, all those films, they just not. I don't watch those films. They're not things that appeal to me, because, there's this wonderful thing that Stephen King says, which is, once you see the zipper down that monster's back, the gag's over. And for me, those films are kind of, that they're all, you can tell the crocodile's fake and the swamp's fake, and so therefore I wasn't attracted to that. And so we just looked at, how do we integrate real crocodiles into our film, and how do we shoot in a real location? And it was just lucky that we had not a swamp, a mangrove, within 30 minutes of where I lived, that we could use for the location, and we could go and shoot real crocodiles in this country. And so that's how that methodology began, and it was very successful. That film did well for itself. And so then the next one, why don't you do it? Well, I'd had a shark story in my head all the time. Like I read this shark story when I was, I don't know, in my mid-20s or something, and it's this amazingly haunting story about this boat that goes down and these people try and survive, and the shark comes along and picks them off one by one.
Wow.
And so that was another true story, and using the same methodology, that was successful. So it became obvious that if you use this methodology, which is difficult, I'm not saying it's easy, because it's much easier to go, let's shoot in the studio with CGI, and the CGI isn't that good, then people just will accept it.
That's the zipper. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so that was quite successful. The Reef, well, it was successful. And so with this one, it was, the difference isn't the methodology, the difference is the storytelling. So in the original Reef, it purely is for me a survival story, whereas this one, as we've discussed, I tried to elevate it more by bringing in the domestic abuse angle.
Now, this is going to sound like, oh, you went to high school with that person? Do you know blank? Oh, you went to that high school? Oh, you grew up in that town? Do you know so? Remember, Geekscape Australia is a massive continent, but Geekscape I like to think of as a small community. One of the people who've been on Geekscape before is, we may have been mentioning him without saying his name, but Greg Mclean, who did Rogue.
Oh, yeah.
You know Greg? Did you all go to school together?
I don't know him personally, but obviously I know of him as a filmmaker. Yeah, I thought Wolf Creek was great.
He does the Wolf Creek series. He does the Wolf Creek films. And he did Rogue, which Rogue was the movie with Sam Worthington where was that based? Was Rogue kind of based on that story of being chased up a tree by a giant?
No, it's there's no crossover between those two stories whatsoever. I think they're stranded on an island as the tides come up. That's it.
That's a pretty effective movie.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because both those films came out around the same time, but because Rogue was relatively big Hollywood film, he got a lot more exposure. Blackwater is just one of those little gems that has just been sitting there. When people discover it, they go, "Oh wow!" It didn't really get. This is
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, I was telling this to a filmmaker earlier today. Success for one person doesn't necessarily mean a lack of success for the other person. If anything, they help each other out. If somebody watches Rogue or watches Blackwater and is still pretty amped up, hopefully they just don't go and see the 1980 movie Alligator, where it's in the sewers of New York and just kind of eating people. Not that filmmaker didn't go on to do some pretty amazing things, but Geekscape this isn't going to be an alligator, a movie like Alligator. This isn't going to be a Sharknado movie. This is a movie like what you said. I knew I could trust you, Andrew, in watching this movie and knowing that the sharks weren't going to get picked up into a tornado and flung at cities because of that opening. I hadn't seen any of your films before. I'm sorry, but watching The Reef Stalked, which Geekscape is going to tell you, it's out right now in theaters in the US and on Shudder. I thought it was a pretty gutsy move to start away from the water for the most part with that domestic abuse storyline and to get us to care and say, hey, viewers, we're going to get to the shark. But first, we need to get to the terror. We need to get to the suspense. We need to get to the trauma. And then we're going to put it in the water and we're going to mess with her the entire rest of the movie.
Well, I really appreciate that because, there are certain distributors and they go, oh, it's too slow. Well, you got to have a kill within, the standard thing. You got to have a kill within the first 5 minutes and all that sort of stuff. Well, I kind of do, but and so, it's great to hear that you appreciated that. Thank you.
I thought that part of the film was great, and it's what gets you locked in, and ultimately, to keep talking about Spielberg films, because obviously we talked about Jaws, I keep thinking about people yelling at Spielberg and for those first 5 minutes of Raiders where he's just going through the jungle and not showing his face until you get that turnaround on the screen direction when he whips the gun out of the hand and says, I think that it's such a great reveal when Harrison steps in the light, but you have to imagine that the producers are like, we just trucked all these people into the jungle. You got to show Harrison's face. Come on, first 5 minutes of the movie, you don't see Harrison's face. He's just moving left to right. What are we paying you for, Steve? And what are we paying Harrison for? And then you got that. That's one of the greatest openings.
Yeah. I know. A friend of mine once said, you know, you're making a cookie, but producers want your cookie to be all sugar. You got to put some flour in there as well to hold it all together, and you know, keep you just wanted the right amount of sugar, not just all sugar.
No, you can't get you can't let their teeth get gooey,
That's
or else
right.
they're gonna be sick of the cookie.
Exactly.
Well, listen, I don't want your fingers to start pruning here in this
No.
interview like they did in the water. But Andrew, I really want to see what comes next. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a listen. I don't have listen. I'm not your manager, but
No, you're not. Maybe you should
as a
be.
fan, I want to see you. Take some of the time off from the Reef, Stalked,
Yeah.
and go all in on that human script. All right.
Well, you might be happy to hear that I've got a black comedy, actually, you know, sort of a horror comedy idea, which is Spinal Tap meets Dracula. It's about an old air band that are on, you know, heavy metal band that are on the way out, and they rock into this town, and unbeknownst to them, there's a whole bunch of vampires there, and they've got to beat them over with their music, the sacred chord, and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, I hope Shutter, because we promote so many Shutter releases, I hope they get on board. I hope anybody gets on board. I'd love to see that movie, Andrew. It'd be awesome.
Yeah. It would be, wouldn't it?
I can't think of anything more different, but more appropriate than the Reef Stock, dude. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I love talking to you.
Cheers.